Everything I've loved in this world, and even the curse that fell on me too.
Hello everybody! Infinite Shinjo here, and welcome to another video. And today, I am here to review Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s. So obviously, I recorded reviews to the original 6 Yu-Gi-Oh! Essentially within the span of a couple of weeks, posted them, and now since Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s is done, and it's within a reasonable time frame from the time I recorded this range review, I'm gonna review this. So obviously I want to start off by saying that Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s is the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Not done by Gallop, it's done by Studio Bridge, a whole new design, a whole new atmosphere. Rush duels are the primary format. You can look up the rules on Rush duels if you really want to know. But essentially, this isn't a typical Yu-Gi-Oh! Review, because it's vastly different from the other 6 before it. But obviously, Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's just finished. It's literally the week after it finished. I'm going to try and get it out decently within a reasonable frame. But yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's 92 episodes. Not as long as I would have preferred, but I'll get into that when I discuss the specifics about the show. So, let me start with the characters, because I'm realizing there might not be people that are familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s. So, from left to right on the bottom is Luke, Roman, Gakuto, and Yuga. There are 3 other characters that are relevant for the story, and they are essentially the mini-bosses of each arc. First up is Roa Kirishima, cousin to Roman. Second is Nail, and then third is Asana. Those are essentially the main players in the show. The other characters that aren't villains are essentially irrelevant. And that's one of the things that I do like about the show. Obviously, I only talked about 7 characters so far, but they are all pretty strong characters. And they're definitely characters that break the mold when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows as a whole. To give specifics, Luke is a character that almost went undefeated the entire show. Roman actually defeated the main character, so to speak. Although you could argue that Luke and Yuga are both main characters in their own right. And to that note, Yuga, even though he's essentially the protagonist of the show, since his name has U in it, he doesn't always win duels. As a matter of fact, his track record is absolutely abysmal for the most part. But that's the thing that I do like. Even though he loses a lot, it does kind of break the mold where you can't automatically predict that he's going to win duels for the most part. There are some instances that you could, but most of the time it's a hard case to make. And also for Asana, even though she's not an actual villain on the grand scale like Merrick is, but Asana does act like a villain, and that is something that's actually different because there are very few females that are threatening villains, especially in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I do like the throwbacks to other Yu-Gi-Ohs. Obviously, there are cameos by monsters like Summon Skull, Dark Magician, and even random cameos like Jack Atlas's D-Wheel is in an early episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! I wouldn't have known that if not for Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything, so shout out to him. But also, there's a character that uses exclusively Yuma Tsukumo cards. They're not actually his cards, but essentially spin-offs of the cards. And I'm sure there are other references that you can make, like one of the episodes is a riding duel, a reference to 5Ds. And there are other references you could probably find in the show, but those are the ones I noticed. Just the nice little cameos from the other shows show that they actually care about the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise as a whole. Also, there are some moments in the show that just seem like throwaway things, but they actually impact the show. Like, there's this character, I don't even know how to explain this. So, Luke has a sister named Tiger. Tiger literally demolishes a fax machine and takes this character called the Luke Man that Luke made up when he was younger and bring it to life. Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s literally did something like that. But there's this character called the Luke Man that ends up being a final boss, where it actually comes back later on in the show. And there are other examples, but I don't want to spend too much time on them. Now, the last thing that I put for a pro, and granted it's kind of a pro and a con, I'll get into that later, is Yuga and Luke's treatment. Like I said, it's the dual protagonist sort of thing, because it's almost like Studio Bridge has got the double fold of Luke being a protagonist like Yusei or Yusaku that very rarely loses a duel. And then you got a character like Yuga, who is a lot more experimental in the fact that he doesn't necessarily win every duel that he has. But I do like that sort of duality where it actually does impact the final episode. Because Luke losing at the end is just a huge shock, considering that he has never lost a duel on screen the whole time. So the fact that Luke's track record is perfect and Yuga's track record isn't exactly the best, and the fact that the less skilled duelist out of the two actually wins, is a really good, big, impactful moment at the end of the show. So, on to the cons, and it was a bit hard for me to figure out a couple of these, because I just love this show so much. I know when I ranked it, it wasn't finished, but I think now it might be in my top 3 or top 4. It was just really good overall. But there are some issues that I had with it. The first issue is the 13 episode arcs that they had. Very early on in the show, they had 13 episode arcs. The first one, I think it was called The Birth of Rush Duels, and then there was one called the Machine Cavalry arc. Every 13 episode, there's a new threat and a big bad boss that Yuga has to fight at the end. It's not a bad idea, because a lot of seasonal anime have 12 or 13 episodes. But when they do that for 3, 4, 5 plus arcs, it does get kind of repetitive. It's a formula, but it's not exactly good, because the arcs are just so predictable. They did kind of change it up in one arc where it was 15 episodes, but every arc after the first one, the very first episode of an arc is just recap of everything that happened so far. It's not as bad recap as Brains had, but it's just one of those things where the set amount of episodes did kind of hurt it to an extent, because it made it so obvious how things were going to end for the most part. Like I said earlier, Yuga's treatment in the show isn't exactly the best. I know that win-loss ratio doesn't necessarily impact how good or bad a character can be, but it's just so out there considering all the other protagonists. Even a character like Yuma Tsukumo, who was a terrible duelist at first, probably has a better track record than Yuga does. But on the other hand, Luke's treatment is just baffling. I mentioned earlier how he never lost an on-screen duel until the very end. And that I just find weird, because it's not like Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's as opposed to having duels end in a draw or a no result, because they did that with a duel with Gakuto and Nail, they did that with a duel with Rons and Rinosuke, so it's not like they're opposed to having a duel end in a draw. And at least with that, you don't bring down Luke's opponent. Like, if he's fighting a big bad villain or something, it's not like Luke automatically wins, so that villain's importance is diminished. At least ending it in a draw shows that villain has potential, because they can draw with somebody that's undefeated. But that's just my opinion. I guess at the same time, they might have been planning for Luke to go undefeated the whole show, just to have this last episode hit all the more hard. Unfortunately, the last part is that there is no real threat in the show. Obviously, this poster makes it seem like there's a threat, but I'll get to that. So, for the arcs, like I said earlier, we had Roa, Nail, and Asana, but I wouldn't really call them, like, big threats. They were just there to stand in the way of Yuga. With the case of Asana, it was all just a misunderstanding for the most part. Overall, I wouldn't really call them super deep threats. Obviously, they are villains in a sense, but they're more just obstacles. And at the same time, with the main 4 alongside those 3, it does make up the 7 from the show, which is a nice touch. But other villains that they had Goha 66, which is just laughable, because they never dueled on screen. And the Goha siblings, they were good, but it was just missed potential. Because you had half of them that just lose their duels. Characters like Yuka get 2 duels. Yuo is a big threat, but he's cast aside because of Goha Yuga later on. A lot of these characters had a lot of potential, but the writers just didn't want to do as much with them. And then Goha Yuga, like I said, was a character that overthrew Yuo in importance, but it just didn't hold up because Goha Yuga then got pushed aside as well. I would have liked it if they would have done something with Goha Yuga as the final boss, but they decided to have it be Otis, which that's a different case in all in itself. Because Otis is a character that realistically has a worse track record than Yuga because he never won a duel. Essentially, Otis shows up in the first episode. He uses Blue Eyes White Dragon. And then every other appearance, he just uses Dark Magician, Summon Skull, whatever old-timey monster you can think of. And he just disappears for half the show. And then he comes back at the end. Oh yeah, I'm the villain now. It's just kind of weird. Granted, they probably had a plan to have Otis be the final boss at the end. But it's just kind of weird that they didn't do anything with him. He didn't even have to duel, just show him somewhere. But realistically, no threat is the largest issue that I could have. The 13 episode arcs, while predictable, are kind of neat. And the treatment of Yuga and Luke are just there. In hindsight, it wasn't my favorite. But looking back, especially on the last episode, I see what they're going for. But it's been a while since I've recorded a review, so I remember that I also listed off my favorite character from the show and the character that had the most potential or missed opportunity. I can't remember what I called it, but for my favorite character, it's gonna be Asana. I think it's gonna be a tie between Asana and Roman, but I think the fact that Asana is more kind of grounded and down to earth, where a lot of the other characters are kind of super comical with their expressions, Asana's just here taking no crap. And I just like that. At first, I was more keen on Roman since she actually defeated Yuga in a duel. But considering everybody defeated Yuga in a duel, that's not really something to sneeze at. The more I watched the show, the more of a fan of Asana I became. But the most potential for a character, it's going to have to be Goha Yuga. The fact that they build him up and just tore him down immediately is just ridiculous. And the fact that they never even explained why Goha Yuga and Odo Yuga had the same name is just weird. Another missed opportunity in my opinion. But granted, a lot of these issues could be resolved with Yu-Gi-Oh! Go Rush, considering it is seemingly a direct sequel. Not sure how far in the future it's set yet, but it could have a lot of these issues solved, but I'm only going off of Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s as a whole. But I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s if you did watch it, and if you did, let me know your favorite character, let me know your character with the most potential. I don't really feel it's fair to list off least favorite character because it would just be a random character that nobody remembers. I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Momentai.